So welcome everybody to Checkpoint Technologies webinar on tackling application security and testing like you manage a fantasy football team. So glad you all can join. I'm certainly looking forward to this. I've personally not seen this presentation yet, but it looks exciting to me. So we're going to get started here. First thing we want to do is introduce our panelists today. We have Jim Parson. He is the presenter, and myself, Dean Carvin. I've been with Checkpoint Technologies for some time. I'm the Director of Professional Services. I have about 15 to 16 years experience on the HP testing tools, QA tools, legacy Mercury tools with Quality Center Quick Test Pro. And I do a number of consulting and training, and that's my forte, I should put it that way. So Jimmy, I will let you introduce yourself if you don't mind, please.
Hello everyone, I'm Jim Parson. I've been with Checkpoint about four and a half years now. Been in IT around 15 years myself. Started in a variety of different roles started as a business analyst and kind of have worked my way through into the QA world, and then in the last few years have started getting more and more into the security aspect of testing. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of this stuff and show you, a fun way of looking at security testing and putting a security testing team together.
All right, thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about quickly about Checkpoint Technologies. We were incorporated in January 2003. Our office is in sunny Tampa, Florida. We are QA and quality assurance and quality control experts. We focus on functional performance and application security validation. We're HP Software Gold partners, as well as authorized software support partner and HP certified training partner as well. We have a 1,700 square foot facility in Tampa and a very large lab there as well that we provide training and mentoring on. We're also partners with Mobile Labs, Zephyr, and Turnkey Solutions, and also a QAI training partner as well. Our area of expertise or the services we provide is staff augmentation. So what that entails is long-term contracting services, on-site and remote staff augmentation from our office in Tampa. We provide consulting services, which include assessments, installation, configuration, analysis of your current HP solutions. We provide outsourcing as well. It's all US-based functional and performance testing. And training, we're an authorized training partner with HP, so we provide their formal training, whether virtual or on-site at your office. And also mentoring. So the mentoring, you look at the mentoring as a customized training in your environment, on your applications, and it's customized to exactly what your organization needs. And it's a very cost-effective way to get training on the tool sets and also experience as well. Okay? So that's about us. So during the webinar, you'll see a panel on the right-hand side of your screen. In this panel, there's an area for questions. If you expand that questions line out, you'll see an area to ask questions. I would highly encourage you to ask questions during the webinar, because that not only benefits you, it benefits everybody who's listening on the webinar, and we'll look at the recording as well. So the more we can get out of this, the more we can, the better for everybody. And the other thing we'll do is at the end, we'll try to get to all your questions. If we can't, we'll certainly send out an email in 2 to 3 weeks with all the answers to all the questions to everybody who registered for the webinar. All right, so the other thing we'll try to do is if we get some relevant questions during this live presentation, I may interrupt Jimmy, and I apologize ahead of time, Jimmy, but I might interrupt just to pose a question that's relevant for the current subject that we're on. So please feel free to ask questions. We do look forward to that, and that certainly enhances the webinar. All right. So all that being said, without further ado, I'll turn the webinar over to my esteemed colleague, Jimmy Parson. And Jimmy, it's all yours, sir.
All right, thanks, Dean. I appreciate it. So, we're going to get on to the presentation itself. The presentation, if you looked at what the title was, is Treating Application Security and Testing as you would manage a fantasy football team. Some of the topics, and kind of the agenda will be the impact of security breaches, the fantasy football analogy, building a security testing team, security testing, offense and defense strategies, special teams, how to analyze your opponents, and then how to maintain and grow a strong security testing team so that you can continue to be successful in your security fantasy team, which is mimicking, we'll say, a fantasy football team when it comes down to the analogy that we're making today. So, with that being said, I want to spend a little bit of time, and actually a little bit more than a little bit of time, discussing some of the impact of security breaches. We've all been watching the news over the last few years and saw that there has been multiple breaches and some of the impacts to large organizations, and it has become to the point where people are losing their jobs. Depending upon the organization that you're with, there's a potential that you could end up in jail. FDA regulated companies and SEC regulated companies, some of them have police powers, and if you're found negligent of that, you're not only can face fines but also jail time. And so it is very important that as an overall organization that we and you understand what that the impact of that breach is. So we'll talk a little bit about the financial costs of a breach, because that's the immediate impact. That's the thing that you see. That's the thing that's splashed all over the news and in big bold letters, and that's what Fox News and CNN are talking about at all night, all day, multiple days when this stuff happens. So, in a financial banking institute, Fortune 500 institution, they understood this. They've increased investment in security improvements to equal to $250 million a year. You look at that, you don't realize a lot of these financial institutions don't release their financial details, but they do tell about how they've increased certain things. That $250 million a year is a huge amount to increase a budget for one reason only, and that is to increase security, their security. When you talk about national industry groups, consumers have the right to know when breached, regardless of where the risk arises. Breaches are not being treated as minor anymore. I mean, it used to be you might have a small breach and maybe nothing was taken, and that could be swept under the rug, or nobody would know. Now there is such a amount of pressure to be put on to acknowledge that and then let the public know. And a lot of that impact is felt across that, depending upon whether there actually was data that was breached or not. When we talk about healthcare, that's one of these big things of data. With the advances in technology and record keeping, the ability to share records across the web, and across organizations, as far as insurance companies to hospitals to individual little doctors' offices. There's lots of places where breaches can happen, and there's lots of very important data that's held. Not only financial data is involved in that, but patient data. There's not a lot of us that would want all aches and pains that we've ever felt, or for any reason that we've went to the doctor, broadcast around the web, or just not as general knowledge. So it's a very important thing, and Congress has addressed it. Other organizations have addressed it. That personal PIP information and HIPAA rules are there for a reason. But I mean, you look at the consequences of a healthcare data breach. They affect not just that that hospital or insurance companies, you look at the public insurance companies, that's $80 billion a year. So when we start looking at why we pay, large amounts and our healthcare costs a lot, data breaches, and things like that have a very big impact on that to the industry itself. And healthcare industry is at a top when it comes to per capita data breach costs, followed by education and pharmaceutical sectors. So, each breach costs more for healthcare than it does for a lot of other industries. I think that healthcare has been in the news, obviously over the last few years, and it's definitely a lot more data that is being shared across networks than was in the past. If we look at education, an Eastern, university, it estimates the cost of $6.2 million just in credit monitoring for students and staff affected by a data breach. So if you're a small educational, community college or something along those lines, that's a huge, huge cost to your budget to have to provide just credit monitoring. That's not even, anything else that might have happened, or any kind of fines or anything, that goes along with that. Lawyer's fee, records management, consulting, repairs. There's just a lot of costs that go along into it, and you also take a hit in your reputation, and if you have to pass that on to raise tuition to help pay for some of that doesn't help you attract more students. Retails, there's multiples that we saw, as far as from grocery stores all the way up to large, retail stores, that have been breached over the last few years, and we've definitely saw that across the news. When you look at 148 million in associated data breach expenses, that's another big hit. Some of these stores are very large, and they have a very large, profit and loss and balance sheet, but 148 million coming off the top of that just for a data breach is a very large hit to that. And business consequences to a retail, organization, you start looking at customer loyalty and trust. There's a lot of things that happen when you look at that. If I can't trust that I can spend my money at that store, am I going to go there, or am I going to go to their direct competitor? Or am I going to go somewhere maybe smaller, that has less of a chance of a breach? But then, that's not necessarily the greatest idea either. So when we look at direct impact to, not over and above the financial impact, damage to reputation, is another big piece of any kind of a data breach. When you look at a business, poor customer service is the biggest reason that somebody doesn't go back to that store, or they don't frequent that business. If there's an environmental incident, we looked at the oil spills that have happened, and you start to look at what that company is, how much they've paid, what's the damage. That's easy to avoid them if you want. And then a data breach is third. So if you look at that, an environmental incident, something that was so large in the Gulf, being in Tampa, that was huge news for us, and a very big impact to all of the Gulf states as far as to tourism and everything else. But if you look at, there's only a 3% difference between an environmental incident of that size and that importance and a data breach. So you're looking at something that can be very, very impactful to your organization. And I think that's, when you combine the financial impact and the damage to your reputation, in a smaller organization, that could be, a death knell for your company. So anything that you can do at that point in time, or that's relatively, we'll say cost effective and fairly easy to implement in the course of your overall operations, should be attempted in as a part of your, of your overall business plan. So, if we're going to have a little poll here, and
So yeah,
then
Jimmy,
we'll get
I'll take
back
this
to.
if you don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'll take this if you don't mind. Give you a chance to breathe there. Appreciate it.
Sure.
So there's a poll coming up, and we have two of these actually in our presentation today, and your participation would be really appreciated. So this poll asks the question, which group tackles application security testing within your organization? All right, so there's a few options, and it really depends on the maturity and or size of your organization and your quality assurance efforts as well. So does your development or developers take responsibility for security? Does the quality assurance, quality control team take responsibility? Or the combination of those two groups? Maybe you're a very mature organization, you have a dedicated security testing team. And then there are other organizations who really just have no thoughts around security testing, haven't really considered it, so there's an other/none option there as well. So we'll give you a few seconds to select the one that you like, and we're getting some results now. Appreciate the input. So what we have so far is right now the quality assurance and quality control teams, there's none of those attendees of our webinar who have those departments handle the security testing. Next on the list, coming up from the bottom, would be development. Development certainly has to have a role in it because a lot of it has to do with how the application is coded and so forth. And then there's a tie between a dedicated security testing team and other none, and the largest group is a combination of the two groups, so that responsibility is shared in your organization among multiple teams. So thank you very much for that participation. That's great information for all of us. So Jimmy, I'll turn it back to you, sir. Oh, as a matter of fact, if I can just interrupt one more time, we do have a question around the damage to reputation slide. So I think this individual looks like they work for a smaller business. They don't have data that they deem would have a tangible value online. So it's not something. So it seems like it's something that there's no credit cards, things of that personal data really. Why would they be concerned about being a target via a security breach?
Oh, well, thanks, Dean. That's a good question, and it's, when we look at, we think of a lot of these organizations and these data breaches, and the ones that we see, are obviously, the ones that make the news. You don't see the small mom and pop shop that gets hit because, most people don't think of it, or it's not a big enough news story to really impact or become a part of the daily news cycle. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, and it doesn't mean it's not important. When you look at how attacks and things have evolved, I was talking to a colleague, and they mentioned that a small school district had gotten hit where a hacker had gotten in and gotten a hold of their data and locked it down and basically, it's called a crypto locker now, and basically held them ransom for their data. Nobody would think that was a big deal, would be a big target, but it was. The funny part about it is when they figured out what the cost of what the hacker was looking for, it was in the hundreds of dollars. It wasn't this huge amount of money, but for that small school district, that was a big problem. They couldn't get at any of their data. Other things, a lot of times people don't understand, what people are looking for. It could be that they're not looking necessarily for the data on, to harm your organization. Maybe they're looking for social security numbers or credit card numbers, or any kind of financial data or any kind of personal data on somebody, so that they can put two and two together and maybe attack another organization, getting any kind of a list of people and being able to get credit cards or even apply for credit cards. It used to be a scam a long time ago. You'd get that pre-approved card, somebody'd steal your mail. Well, now rather than steal your mail, maybe they're looking to get somebody's name and social security number. It could be an employee. It doesn't necessarily have to be data or customer data that is out there. Getting into your system, even in a small organization, can not only damage your reputation, but can also, just cause problems. So, I hope that answers that person's question, and allow, so.
Appreciate it.
So, yeah, thanks, Dean. All right. So the next part of this is we're going to tackle application security like a fantasy football. And the fantasy football analogy, was one thing, as I was thinking about this and trying to, come up with a good way of explaining, kind of how to put all this stuff together. I like to play fantasy football. If you can see on the screen, I am a Minnesota Vikings fan. I grew up in Minnesota. So even though we perennially do not seem to win things, I'm still a fan and appreciate the team. And as a football analogy, and as we start looking at fantasy football, you start to think of, well, what are we doing? What do we need to do? Well, every week we have a matchup. There's somebody out there that we're competing against, and they're putting a team together to try to beat us. And that is really what hackers are doing. They're assembling on the opposite side the same types of things, and sometimes they have an easier hand at it. They're not constrained by rules and laws and internal company policy, lack of resources. A lot of these hackers have nothing but time. Some of them are state supported, so they get money. They don't, that's their job, is to go out there and find targets. And there are bad people in bad countries and bad things that are out there that are and this is their way of either making money or exploiting technology or exploiting data, and that's what they're doing. So I look at that as the other team. That's who I'm preparing for every week. That's when I go out and I start drafting my players in fantasy football, well, that's a lot of what you're doing in application security and in testing in general, is you're putting together a team. You got an offense, you've got your weapons, you got to score some points. That's what your offense is going to do and allow you to do. And you're going to pick your dynamic players, and some of those are going to be, when we talk about this, some will be applications, some will be people. Other things might be resources, or they might be, it might take money, it might take, organizational structure and things like that need to be put in place to make you successful and give you the offense that you need to be, to beat that opponent. You're going to have some defensive strategies that are going to play a part. And then you'll have some special teams, and all of those kind of combine to form that fantasy football team, and to give you the weapons and give you all of the people and software that's needed to take that bad guy on and be successful, and then go on to that next matchup. Because one thing you'll understand is, we talk about this as fantasy football, and football season is only so many weeks long, and you have a championship. Unfortunately, with when we talk about threats and people trying to get at your data, that's an ongoing battle, and it's daily, weekly, and hourly. It doesn't stop. There is no championship trophy at the end. But every day that you go by without a breach, every bit of structure and organization and tools and everything that you use are gonna give you a better chance to have another day and another win. So that's kind of the analogy. That's kind of how we've tackled this, And so we'll get started. The next slide is starting to understand your offense. So when we talk about this, you're going to want to have a strong knowledge of the HTTP protocol, client browser, server, and server communication through HTTP. Have at least a basic knowledge of SQL injection and cross-site scripting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And so you'll see the following techniques are going to help you in performing that quality security testing. Some of these are the main kind of attacks that somebody would execute against you, and so they're vulnerabilities that you have to understand and be able to recognize. So you want to look at cross-site scripting, and you should check for cross-site scripting and using so any HTML or script should not be accepted by an application, and so if it does, you can be prone to an attack by cross-site scripting. So understanding what that is and understanding how some of these things work and what your offensive capability is as far as utilizing tools. So you should have somebody in the organization that has a basic knowledge of this. But in addition, you're not going to be doing this all on your own. It's not like I would ever recommend that I'm going to go out and start, executing cross-site scripting attacks against my application manually. You can go out, and there are tools out there, and that's what a part of your team is, finding the appropriate software. Obviously HP has Fortify and Web Inspect. IBM has tools. There are other organizations and software vendors that have specific tools that are out there to help you identify these attacks. And that's what you're going to use. And whether it's a SaaS model or what, and we'll talk about some of the modeling and how you can get those tools a little later on, but they're out there. So, but understanding that cross-site scripting is important and what it does and how it can be exploited on your application is something that you as a team should understand and have some members on that team that understand it. Some of your, when we talked about maybe not executing all your testing as far as manually, you should have, understand that your offense can include ethical hacking. So you can go out and find an organization or individual that will come in and you'll give them your application and tell them to go to town and they'll report back if they were ever able to execute a breach and how it happened. Password cracking, having internal processes to have, strong passwords and passwords that need to be reset periodically and with certain applications more mobile than anything, the two-factor authentication and things like that are all great things to have. You should also be testing that and utilizing software and tools to attempt to crack into your application and break that. And that's another offensive tool that you have. SQL injection has been around for a long time, and it's, one of those ways where you can get access directly to the database and data in that database. So it can become a very critical point. So that's another one of those things that most applications that, are out there to test application security, they're also going to be testing SQL injection. And that is, one of the things is you should, entering a single quote in a text box should be rejected by your application. You shouldn't be able to just use simple characters and just be able to enter things and see, what happens. And that's one of your strategies is to be testing for SQL injection. Vulnerability scanning, that is a computer program that is designed to identify security vulnerabilities, and that's another part of your tools. Understanding and doing a posture assessment, looking at the overall security posture of your organization, combining all of these, ethical hacking, security scannings, risk assessments, those type of things, so that that you have an understanding uh, of your overall organization and what their security processes and methodology and even uh, what the thoughts are around application security. Uh, there's URL manipulation through HTTP GETs, ad hoc data testing, testing random data, which is included in requesters, parameters, encoding random data, buffer overflow testing. That's one that's been around for a long time. That have been vulnerabilities off of that. And that's as simple as long strings of a single character or varied string patterns. And this brings us up to our other poll.
All right.
And I'll let Dean take over for it.
Sounds great, sir. Thank you very much. So our other poll, and maybe we can categorize this more as a quiz, basically. We're just making sure you're not taking the opportunity during this hour to go take a nap somewhere. We're making sure you're listening. Right? So in entering a single quote in a text box to verify it's rejected by applications is an example of what? Is that URL manipulation, SQL injection, or an XSS, cross-site scripting? This just kind of tests your knowledge of security testing as well, security principles. I'll give you a couple minutes to vote on that, or put your answer in. Appreciate that. Just keep it open for another second. All right, there we go. So, SQL injection was the answer. Jimmy, is that correct? I'm not going to
yes, it is, Dean.
All right, great.
So, and if anybody was, if you were paying attention, I did specifically mention that in my, so that it would hopefully give everybody a hint as to the poll. So, the next kind of slide takes, that offense and starts to put it together and say, maybe those are our teammates, those are the people I'm drafting, those are the applications I'm drafting. Now I want, some type of an offensive strategy, and here's your, where you're putting all of those kind of things together. And so, you want to understand, and the first way to start to do that is to do a security architecture study. And that is to understand the business requirements, what your goals and objectives are in terms of what the security compliance of the organization is. And then, then start planning and planning security testing in general. A lot of times we coming from a QA background, we focus a lot on, is that button the right color, and are we able to enter in this, and we'll talk about a store. Can I buy this item? Can I complete an order? Financially, can I get, move this money from one account to another? And, and those requirements get passed through, and the tests are created off those. But, and maybe we do a little security testing like we talked about passwords. Oh, hey, is it validating that there's at least 8 characters in there? Well, yes, there are. And, is it uppercase and are special characters allowed or not? And, we do those kind of things, but you might not specifically be writing or looking at tests that say, hey, have we validated that there's no cross-site scripting, or that we're testing for that, or that are we performing any tests on SQL injection? And and we should start putting those things in and start developing those security testing and holding those in the same type of a location, whether, whatever your tool that you're using for your test management, whether it's, TFS or Quality Center or Zephyr or Doors or whatever tool that you have. Rational, has a tool out there for test management. Using those tools and keeping and getting them grouped in, and understanding that as part of your releases and cycles that you're actually executing those security tests, and then understanding that that's there, and that comes in, as part of the security architect study and the security architecture analysis. And that's those two kind of go hand in hand. Uh, and then looking at classifying your security testing, as far as what system setup is needed, and what list of vulnerabilities are known and security risks that are there for your application that are just inherently there, so that you can develop testing around that. And then once you've got those things put together, prepare a threat profile, and that is you start to look at what would anybody be looking for in my data. Do I have a lot of financial data? Well, then that's a big red flag. Or do I have a lot of HIPAA data or patient data? Well, those are the things that we know are very valuable and very sought after when people are looking at attacking an application or trying to create a data breach. And then based upon all of those things, start to prepare your test plan. You want to understand why people would want to attack you, what that important data is, what the application requirements are, what vulnerabilities are coming in through the application itself, and then kind of understanding what your goals and objectives are from a high level, so that you can put the whole test plan together and make it work. And then you start to look at, once you've identified a threat and a vulnerability and security risk, start preparing a traceability matrix. We use this obviously in a lot of areas with QA and QC, as far as, we're going to map our requirements to, what are covered, what requirements are covered by what tests, what requirements, possibly are covered in another requirement, or and creating those linkages across those different types of artifacts. That's the same thing that you want to do when you come to a security testing approach. And then identify security testing tools. We know that just as in manual testing in QA, and you might hear me refer back to the QA world more so, but that's where I came from. So, we know that you're limited by your ability with manual testing to how much of an organization, of an application can we test. When then we're limited by resources. At that point, a single person can only test so many tests per day. So if that's the case, then there's a good business case and a good reason to go out there and start finding the tools that will help you to supplement those manual testers. We're never going to get away from having them, because no tool can has that ability to think like a person and be creative and try to come up with new attacks and new things. But they can execute a lot of tests and a lot of different tests in a lot faster, more less in labor-intensive manner. And then want to prepare a security test case document and test case. Then we want to execute those test cases, retest defects, and then create some reports. So when we look back at this, and no matter whether it's security testing or not, testing is testing in the overall aspect of it. You're going to come up with a test plan, even though they're security test versus functional test, and you're still going to want to report on it. You're going to want to find any defects and and retest those defects. And that's why I think the QA QC department in any organization, it has a lot of value in the application security testing, and that is, even though you might not have all of the knowledge of the attacks that are being carried out, everything that that you're doing to do the testing part of it is something that should be very much in your wheelhouse as far as that. So I think organizations can leverage that to help put together good, solid test plans and testing strategies and executing those and actually being able to report and come up with some very good reporting off of those things. So when we talk about,
can I interrupt 1 second, sir? We do have a question. Someone's asking, could you elaborate on the concept of a traceability matrix? What is that, and what value does that provide?
Sure. So a traceability matrix, in a QA world, and is basically, when you look at your requirement, whether it's a security requirement or functional requirement, business requirement, you develop all your requirements. Well, once you've got your requirements, you need to test those requirements. That testing, can be separate. If you have them separated, there is no way of saying, well, test A covers requirement A, or test A covers requirement A, B, and C. So what you can do as part of, and a lot of test management software will allow you to start creating linkages between the artifacts. So what I can do is I can create a link between requirement A and say that test A covers requirement A, or I can say test B covers requirement B, C, and D. And then by creating that linkages, and you can do it manually in Excel or in any kind of, in any manual process. It can be done in a Word document or any kind of a, anything where you can develop a kind of a grid where you can have a matrix. And what you're going to do is output that matrix and say, here's my traceability matrix. Requirements are covered by these tests. Now, that allows me to not only look at what is covered, but what is not covered. So I got to make sure I state this right. All requirements should have a test, but all tests do not have to have a requirement, or is it backwards? I got to, but the underlying, the point of the matter is it's to give you visibility of what your test coverage to your requirements is. And, and we all know, most of your coding is done off of the requirements. So when we start to test those requirements, that should test the code that was written to that the requirement was coded to in the application. So does that make sense?
That sounds great to me. Appreciate it. Thank you for accepting the interruption.
Sure, not a problem. So when we talk about threats, there's some newer threats that are out there, and they're kind of rehashed of some older threats, and that is, we've all heard of denial of service attacks, and we talked about password cracking earlier, and port scanning, and there's active sniffing and rootkits and these kind of things. But the important word kind of in this, is the distributed kind of the distributed denial of service. In the past, networks were slower, machines were slower, and a single person could, maybe have their one machine attack and try to run multiple, hits on a website, and maybe they had a machine powerful enough, or maybe they got together on a social network, or they got it, however, and they got 10 or 15 of their friends, and they all hit the same thing with one or two machines. Well, with networking being what it is, and the ability for machines to be distributed over wide networks, wide areas, now if you have access to hundreds of machines, you can set them all to attack a single website, and you get a distributed denial of service. And when we talk about the tools that are available, there are the new kind of hacker tools that are out there are they have anti-forensics built in, so they hide. You go to run your antivirus, you run your Malwarebytes or any one of these tools, and and you come up clean, and you think, great, no problem. Well, the problem is that hacker now understands that most people are running antivirus, so they put that code somewhere nobody would think to look, or it deactivates itself kind of as it, after, if it's not being used, it's just kind of laying there, and it's not in an area where that's normally scanned. And they have dynamic behavior, and that's kind of that same thing. Is you have a tool that, or a hacking tool that, can do more than just sit there and kind of launch a worm. It's got different behavior, and depending upon what's going on, and they're modular. So you have that ability to deploy them to multiple machines, and they're they have a in the same way that we build modular code and modular types of testing, that that is a very important part of that, is being able to reuse some of that, those tools across multiple environments, multiple machines. So that makes it makes it easier for that your opponent to capitalize on their offensive tools over what you have, and and it makes it that much more important for you to have a solid defense, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Your common defensive methods, when we talk about application security, the first thing is to have write secure code. And that's one of the things over the last years. I've been to a few conferences, and some of the keynote speakers have certainly stressed that. But in the past, when we talked, just like we talked about traceability matrix and we talked about requirements, what did a developer do? You coded the requirements. If there's no security requirements there's no security that gets written into the code. So hey, I need this button. Well, okay, there's a button. Or I need this. It's easy to talk about passwords because that's that's probably the first line of security in any application anymore. But hey, I just need a box, and I need a password that's that's masked. Okay, well, that's what that developer is going to code to. If you don't tell him that password field needs to have 8 digits and needs to have upper and lower case and special characters, and needs to validate that that those are met, and give you kind of that nice green checkbox or whatever that tells you that password is secure, or is of a strength enough to to pass. They're not going to code to that, and that's the first thing that should be done. And one of your defensive tools is, right there, it's called static code analysis, and that is what it does. You have an application, that goes out and it scans your code, and it looks for all of those vulnerabilities that are common and that are identified, and it looks for the SQL injection, points. It looks for, any kind of a identified vulnerability in the code itself. And that's your first line of defense. First of all, codes, have security standards that are coded, into or requirements that are put into your code, so that you're creating secure code, and then test it. Use a tool to that will do static code analysis. And that's like the next one is kind of follow the basics, and that's the same thing. And I was just mentioning. And then, the biggest one is to have a core playbook. Put in a secure software development lifecycle. And if you look at the, little picture to the right, you'll see that, as you kind of go around to the right, you'll see how all of these things are done. You validate your requirements, and as part of that is your vulnerability testing, and then you perform a gap analysis, which it has to do with your product security requirements. Register and update if you have third-party software. Make sure that's all up to date. And and you kind of look at the secure coding and static analysis, and that's kind of how you start. So you prevent it, you detect it, you validate it, and this is how you start to build that secure software development lifecycle. So you want to make sure that all of that is included, in your development process. So when we look at that, That's your most common defense, and that's probably the biggest thing. And when we look at a fantasy football team, you're never looking for your defense to score a lot of points. You definitely want to pick a good, solid defense so that so when you do get your points, it's on the fact that they're keeping the other team from scoring a lot of points on you. And when we talk about special teams, I mean, this is where you kind of get into that combinations of whether it's tools or resources, and being able to to put them together to make a special team. And that is, you want to look at for a tool that might be focused on a specific attack. Some of these tools that are out there are, that they'll check for multiple different things. Well, maybe you know that you just need a single tool that is going to check for SQL injection. That's your big concern, or that's your starting point. Maybe maybe you're a small organization, and you say, hey, we don't have a lot of money for some of these tools that cost a lot, and you're going to find a single tool that's cheaper that looks for a specific attack. Maybe you're looking for a specific time frame. One of the big things that's out there, obviously, a lot of software is sold now as SaaS, as software as a service. So most of the big players are going to have that ability to say, hey, you know what? Maybe we decide we only need one scan or one scan a year, one scan every 6 months. We can go out to a company and maybe lease or have a single scan ran on a software as a service. You might want to be able to, maybe you need that for 3 or 4 months. You can do a leased type of approach for that tool. Or, if you come up to it and you say, what, the budget's there and we really need to be running these scans, all the time, and we don't want to pay for a single scan every couple months, and it's more cost effective, we can have it on premise and we have a perpetual license. So, the tools are out there. Being able to put that combination of the tools that you need into a specific requirement is there. And it's the same thing with your resources. You definitely want to train your team on security. If you don't have that expertise in-house to do that, bring in some contract expertise. And overall, if you have to, outsource that. But you need to have people in place that are, that have those skills and that have the experience with the tools so that you can get the most out of them if you're going to spend the money for them. We go into, we kind of went over our offense, our defense, our special teams. Now what we look at is, how are we going to win the game? How do we understand what our opponent is? And we look for, current trends and attacks. And it's as simple as going out, a lot of times opening the newspaper, going to a web page, going to the news, and you're going to see if somebody's been breached. And a lot of times they might not tell you exactly what the breach was, or but you'll find out more about it, and you can start to investigate what it was and figure out what you need to be looking for. Looking at the OWASP top 10 Open Web Application Security Project every 2 years basically puts out a list of the top 10 types of attacks that are prevalent. And so you can go out there and just search on Google for OWASP top 10. You'll see what the most current release is, and then being able to look at those and start to understand that if we cover at least these top 10, you have some coverage. And that's the same thing. Investigate the causes of the headline breaches is what you're saying, what I was saying, and that's kind of like the current trends and attacks. But I kind of got them flipped. But the current trends is just understanding and keeping your ear to the ground and looking and finding those security companies and websites and just seeing what they say is the number one attack at any time or in a recent history. And the keys to winning the game, like fantasy football, is understanding your opponent, knowing what looking at what players that they're going to put on the field, understanding their motivations, understanding what they have in as far as their offense and their tools, And so understanding the other team is a big part of this. And your common hackers, your common people that are looking to get into your application, you have a criminal syndicate. What's their motivation? They're motivated by money. If they can get in and get a bunch of credit card numbers, they can go out on the dark web, or they can go places and sell them if they don't use them themselves, and make money off of that data. You're hacktivists. Maybe you are in a field that people are upset about. We talked about environmental aspects. The oil companies are probably big ones that get a lot of flack, and a lot of people that have ideologies other than theirs, and they would love to give somebody a black eye or get that data. They're out there not for money, but for the ideal. They're ideologues. Your script kiddies, you can't dismiss them. They might not have the sophistication of a criminal syndicate. They might not have the sophistication of a rogue nation type of deal, or a state-sponsored kind of hacking. But they have nothing but time. A lot of times they're young kids or younger people. They're out there for reputation and street cred. And then you can never overlook the fact that there's a disgruntled employee. Somebody got fired, somebody got laid off, you had a riff, and that person went out and felt that they should have been employed, and they're not anymore, and they've got inside information that they can share with some of these other other people on that team or other places, or if they've got the skills, they can go out and do it themselves. And knowing the offensive and defensive capabilities of those other teams, and understanding the tools that are out there, going out and finding out, and and just having some curiosity to understand what some of the hacking tools are, what do they use, how easy are they to use, and just having that knowledge, and then exploiting that knowledge. If you know that your application is something that a criminal syndicate would be after, well, then you know what their motivation is. That gives you an edge up on what you're trying to protect. That makes you maybe look at those ways that people can get at that those credit card numbers, or maybe maybe in your testing approach you have to protect that and use dummy numbers so that there's not or masked data or anything like that, to where it's not just simple as, for somebody to grab that, and knowing that that's what's valuable to them. And and to kind of conclude what we're doing, and what we've talked about today, is to understand this is serious business. We're talking about it in an analogy of a football team or a fantasy football team. Overall, it's very serious. And to the organizations that have had data breaches, there are people that have lost their jobs, they've lost money, they've lost reputation. I'm sure that that they're not thinking of it maybe as a fantasy football team, but it's very serious in the fact of what it can do to your organization, and even not your industry. So we talk about that second piece. The impact can be devastating. Missing one key player can result in a loss, and not understanding that maybe that there needs to be a budget for that application security tool. As far as that could be it, or maybe it's a budget to add in a security consultant or bring in some outsourcing. But you have to be cognizant of that. Being aware of the situation and proactive planning can help keep your team winning the matchups, and that's the goal. And like I said earlier in the beginning, this isn't a 16-week season. This isn't a 10-week season. This is a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute. If you drop your guard and you don't do the things that you need to do, you're opening yourself up for a potential breach. And know the cybersecurity threats and your vulnerabilities. You know your application because you coded your application, or your organization coded it. You know what's in it. You know what you're trying to do. You know what your audience is, and you know what kind of valuable data would be in that application. So know what the threat to that is, and know what the vulnerability could be. And then maintain and expand your knowledge and skills of your testing team. And that's in any skill set. It doesn't matter whether it's QA, QC, or in security. the better trained, the better, more thoroughly trained, and the better and more knowledgeable your team is, the less chance that you're going to have a mistake, and you're also going to be able to continue winning, and that's the overall goal of this. So at that point, we're to the Q&A section. I know that we've got wrapped up about 1 o'clock, so if you guys have any questions, I'm certainly here and available.
We do have a couple questions, but just for the watching out for our time and being sensitive to everyone's schedule today, what we'll do is take the rest of these questions and we'll reply to all the questions, not just the ones that we answered, but all the questions, ones we did answer, ones we did not answer. We'll put those in an email and send them to everybody registered for the webinar in 2 or 3 weeks. We'll do this. But Jimmy, thank you so much. That was great information, great presentation. So appreciate your time today on that.
Sure.
And
not a problem. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate all your time, and I know that it's lunch hour for a lot of us, so I appreciate you taking your lunch and spending it with me today.
Very good. So what we'll do is we do have it recorded, and that'll be sent out in an email as well in the next 24 to 48 hours. So feel free to share that link to the webinar with your colleagues as well. So thank you again for joining, and have a great rest of the day. Bye now.